If you haven't climbed up to Enchanted Rock, drink a cold shiner down in Luckenbach, taking your baby to the river walk, then you ain't met my Texas yet.
Here comes fire from Cain. Now we ain't got no shame. So we started a pod, took Yankees to town.
So I'm going to call to order the meeting of the people that want to make Brian Sheffield more money. This is our group meeting. President, Vice President.
Excellent. Well, yeah, it's that's one of my missions.
Exactly.
So to speak.
Y'all seem aligned in an interest there. I think that would be good too.
He's my largest shareholder, and I built a really good relationship with him over the last couple of years. So I'm feeling, like we're one team.
We've kind of become pretty close after spending 8 days in Australia together, particularly out in the Northern Territory.
I guess before last time we caught up, you were right before your trip, and
I didn't
know what you were getting into.
I had no idea what I was getting into, but we loaded it up. We went and saw what's Tim's name, the guy from the bar out there.
Oh, Daily Waters Pub.
Daily Waters Pub. Yeah, we went and
Tim.
hung out with him, and so
he's got the pretty smooth little wheelchair with the with the big horns, and he's a good guy.
Yeah, he was chasing a cow around last time we were there. So
he's got the museum. Did you go to the museum?
We poked our head in. We're looking around.
World War II stuff, man.
That was really cool, and very entrepreneurial guy. I mean, was sitting there talking with Brian about do you want to be an oil field bar? Or do you want to have the executives here? You probably don't want to be the oil field bar. Maybe we'll do that over here. Do we asphalt in this runway for the airplanes?
No, he has a grand vision, and he loves us with all the work that we're doing out there to kind of work with him to, kind of set the infrastructure in place really for a lot of the Daily Waters to be the Midland, Texas at some point.
The bar.
the bar.
Exactly. All right. So level set me. Who's Tamboran? Give me the quick elevator pitch on these guys, who y'all are.
So we've built in the last 12 years, I've been in this job, the largest acreage position in the Beetaloo Basin. So we operate about 2 million net acres. When I got involved in 2013, the company had a small 25% working interest on the east part of the basin, about 150,000 net acres. And we sat behind Santos for about a decade, watching them drill wells. And Origin, who was the previous operator of the acreage that Tamboran has with Brian today, was the other big operator in the basin. And so those two operators sort of put some wells down. And it became really clear that in order to unlock commercialization of the Beetaloo, we had to import technology from the US into the Beetaloo. And so, my previous experiences with Exxon, and so I come with a Exxon type mindset that you have to actually control the game and operate to really set up the phasing of a development. And so the timing would have it in 2022, Tamboran went from a non-operating company behind Santos to now the largest operator in the Beetaloo. And so we bought together with Brian the Origin acreage, and together with that transaction, we've been able to attract some really strong partners out of the U.S. H&P has now got a rig on location in the Beetaloo. We have access to 4 more H&P rigs. These are the modern Flex 3 rigs. And then we have a partnership with Liberty to bring frac equipment. The unusual part of both of those deals is that H&P and Liberty became equity shareholders of Tamboran at the time of the strategic deal we did with them. So we set that up as a structure to create alignment between the service company and and us being the operator. And, I would say one of the key elements of, really unlocking a big basin like the Beetaloo is you have to have great partners that are looking kind of over the horizon over the next few decades. And that's one of the things that H&P and Liberty really brought to the mix is they don't see this as being one contract that's going to be 2 years. They see this being, 20 plus years. And that's the right kind of partner for us, because when we think about the next couple of decades, what we want to do is take that 2 million acres and convert that to, 50 plus TCF of reserves and set this up as sort of the Marcellus in the Asia Pacific region. And so key elements to unlocking that strategy is having great partners, having a big acreage position. And, when I look at all the success the U.S. basins have had, including Parsley Energy, Brian being involved in the Permian, other big companies, there were so many companies competing, it created this oversupply that we see today. One of the things that I've been really conscious in setting up Tamboran is to have a majority interest in the Beetaloo, so that we can not have this oversupply situation in Australia. We can phase the development as we see fit, and in a lot of ways, not get into this situation where you have hundreds of operators all competing and all creating all the supply,
overpaying for everything.
Yeah, overpaying. We can do it in a very, I would say, in an adult way. We can plan out our developments, and all that value will go toward the company and obviously the partners that we work with, including Brian.
Yeah. So where are we right now? Because I've actually been there and seen it. When we would at Kane Anderson, we would do early stage assets. So we'd go and we'd drill the first horizontal well in a county.
Yep.
First modern frac. We did a lot of this, and kind of our checklist that we developed that sounds really simple, but trial and error. You kind of figure this out. Number one, you had to have enough in the way of penetration so that you could map the shale or the formation, just so you know where it is.
Sure.
So we had to have that. And then we always had to have proof of productivity of some sort, even if it's crappy old vertical wells that didn't make economic production, but at least you knew the rock would work. And we found it was even better if you had periodic vertical production that was way better. And generally, when you looked in there, you found some sort of natural fracturing of some sort. Either it was on a structure or something. And so when you guys were kind of looking at Beetaloo, step me through what was kind of your checklist on sort of figuring this out, and where are we now?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have some really talented geologists that have really mapped the whole basin and have done quite a bit of detailed work around taking the well control that we do have, most of it being vertical wells with cores and logs and defits, and matching that against about $100 million of seismic that was originally purchased by Amerada Hess when they were in the Beetaloo in late 2009. So $100 million went down in seismic. So we were blessed with
God bless big companies. I mean,
lot of 2D.
We're going to look here. Let's get 100 million of seismic.
Yeah. So 2D seismic pretty much, over the whole 5 million acres. And then we had all these vertical wells, some of which had some vertical flow testing. So we were able to really define where we wanted to focus our horizontal drilling efforts through that data. And so kind of the checklist that we went through was, are you deep? So depth in our thesis is very, very important in the Beetaloo. As you get deeper, you get into overpressure. So we're seeing kind of 0.6 PSI per foot in where we're currently focused at Shenandoah South. On the east part of the basin, where we're partnered with Santos, we've seen up to 0.53 PSI per foot. So as you get deeper, you get overpressure. You also get better shale development. So you see in better porosity, better permeability, thicker sections. So you're dealing with about 450 feet of section here, and you have stacked shales of, up to 4 zones. So, multi-stacked, high pressure, high quality shale is what kind of we've seen as we've put together the regional picture. Now, that is, with that as a backdrop, the thesis around the regional geology is that this is a basin that originally the rocks were laid down about 1.2 billion years ago.
Yeah.
So think about what the world was then. It wasn't dinosaurs and organic matter, dying. It was algae.
Yeah.
So the algae is what got laid down, which created the hydrocarbons, the gas, the natural gas that we're looking to develop in the shale. So what that means is there's not a lot of complexity. So one of the unique things we saw as you've drilled vertical wells, you had very similar section across the whole 5 million acres, which is just fascinating.
Right.
And, the question when I, was working with Santos, but also have heard this from Origin, is they couldn't figure out why there was so much consistency, and we have a very talented geologist named Donnie Lowerly who came from Pioneer. He did a lot of the regional work in the Permian. And his thesis is that, other than overpressure, you should see kind of the same section, very consistent. It's not county to county. You're seeing different kinds of complexity that you might see in an early stage play, here in the U.S.
Right.
Much what you probably saw at Kane Anderson.
Yeah.
Things change, and Brian has a lot of geologists that have a lot of scar tissue from that.
Oh yeah. No,
So
Southern Midland
when we
Basin.
started working with Brian, we were kind of centered around an area in the northern part of the basin called the Amungi area. This is where Origin did a lot of work.
Right.
And, I would say a lot of the technical grounding was around how do we develop that area, because that's where we had a lot of well control, a lot of data, a lot of a horizontal flow test.
Relatively easy pipeline.
Yeah, got
access.
pipeline.
Yeah.
Like I think you guys went out there and saw like the pipeline that's nearby. So we spent a lot of time working on that. But our geologist Donnie Lowerly had this thesis that we need to be in the deeper section of the basin. That's where we think better commercial flow rates would come.
Right.
With overpressure, better rock development, thicker section. And we were lucky because Tamboran, when we did the Origin deal with Brian, there were 2 carried wells in which we had to pay 100% cost on. So first well we drilled was an Origin location at the Amungi area. Basically, they had a rig on location. They wanted to drill that well. We picked up the keys, like we closed on a Wednesday and spudded that well on a Thursday. So
that's
like
crazy.
back to back. And so Tamboran drilled that well, but the well we really wanted to drill was Shenandoah South, which was about 50 miles south, with no well control. But it was right in the center of the epicenter. And that well was Shenandoah South 1. And I think if that well was not 100% Tamboran cost, it would have been very difficult to influence our JV partners, including Brian, to have that big a step out. I know they were very nervous about drilling that.
Happen in America.
Yeah, 50-mile step out. Different. Yeah. You're talking about 10 counties over.
I was crazy. I thought it was crazy when we started using sections away as an analogy. Much less 50 miles.
So we drilled that well, and it became, I think, seen by industry to be the best well drilled in the Beetaloo today.
Right.
It came in right on, kind of our pre-drill depth. It was, the thickest section of any well that's been drilled in the Beetaloo, multi-stacked, 0.6 PSI per foot, validated, essentially validated our regional geology picture. And that is the location that we're drilling 6 more follow-up wells to this year, 4 next year, or 2 in 24, 4 wells in 25. So this year. And that will develop the first 40 million cubic feet a day of production from that Shenandoah South area. And I think the data coming from those 6 wells will be the foundation of sort of the thesis around developing a much larger project that we would envision up to 2 BCF a day. So, I would say, coming back to your question around checklist, I think that Shenandoah South location met all the checklists, but because it was such a big step out,
Right.
it made a lot of folks nervous around our JV table, and probably including Brian himself,
Yeah.
around, drilling that well. But now that that well's been drilled, we've had a one horizontal that we drilled into it. We saw better flow rates than any other flow rate in the basin. We're drilling, two 10,000-foot horizontals, and we're getting ready to pump the stimulation today with the new frac
Oh, cool.
equipment from Liberty. These are big 2,800 pounds per foot type fracs. We got 74 stages going into 10,000 feet in one of the
Oh, yeah,
wells.
those are real fracs.
So these are big, 100 barrels a minute slick water design. So when we talk about U.S. technology, this is what we're talking about, is completion design that would look and feel like you're in the middle of the Marcellus.
Yeah, I was forgetting exactly what Brian or somebody on the trip, or Joel or whoever on the trip was talking about, and it may have even been you and Dick when we got together and talked. The two things that were crazy is, one, like you said, the 1.2 billion years ago.
Yeah.
When this is, because what's the Marcellus? 600 million?
Yeah, it's like 500 million years old.
Yeah, that's like 700 million
Yeah.
years earlier, which is kind of crazy. And then two, in all of Australia, until y'all drilled these new wells, literally, you never had a casing hole big enough to do a modern frac.
Correct. So 5.5-inch casing was is a standard here in the U.S. All the previous wells were 4.5.
4.5.
So you're limited to like 60 barrels a minute.
Yeah.
To the 4.5, and that's where I think Brian and his team brought a lot of. I would say they brought a lot of good energy around how do we, bring 5.5-inch casing into the well design. And that's been one of the keys, I think, in delivering a great well test on this last well we drilled, is we got up to 100 barrels a minute over the 10 stages that we pumped, and then we saw equivalent to what would be a 18 million a day flow test over a 10,000-foot horizontal. So you needed that 5.5-inch casing to get that kind of productivity.
Yeah, it was. This is gonna be a nice problem to have down the road. What was interesting about us doing early stage assets is the mindset was, go ahead and hit the rock with as big a hammer as you can. You can always optimize kind of well-designed frac design later. And we would wind up doing that later. Maybe we don't need all the sand or whatever the case may be.
Right.
But it was, you almost hit it. And then when you got into spacing, it became exactly the opposite mindset of, well, if we think there are 8 wells a section or 6 wells a section, let's just drill 3, right. to see. And we actually wound up making the mistake of, we'll drill 8, and if we just spend too much money, well, next time we'll drill 7. Well, a lot of times when you stick 8 straws in the milkshake, you don't even get all the milkshake back.
Right. Totally.
And so, yeah. What kind of conversations like that are bouncing around Tamboran as y'all are thinking through? Because in effect, you're drilling, call it generation 2 wells.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, naturally, you don't have the lease lines that you're dealing with in the U.S.
2 million acres.
You got 2 million net acres here. So, the rigs that we have on location can drill up to 25,000 feet horizontal or more.
Right.
That's the technical limit. So, whereas, Exxon or say EQT in the Marcellus, they can drill those long laterals, but they just don't have the contiguous lease acres to be able to do so. Whereas in the Beetaloo, we don't have any of those limitations. So I think we're certainly not going to do it in this year's program, but as we think about 2026 and beyond, we will look to drill beyond 10,000 foot, and quickly get down that curve, toward 20,000 feet or longer on the lateral. And that'll involve synthetic muds and other things that we're going to be thinking about this year to be able to unlock that ability to drill that kind of long lateral. I think that would be a game changer for as we think about a 2 BCF a day development plan. You're dealing with right now with 10,000 foot horizontals, you can develop, the 2 BCF a day and get to a plateau in about 180 wells. So with a 20,000 foot horizontal, it's kind of half that.
Yeah.
So, you're talking about 100 wells instead of 200, 180 wells. So you're talking about something less than 100 wells. So, that is on the front of our mind. The other thing I would say is kind of the stages that we're pumping. We're pumping 74 stages over 10,000 foot. That's about 125 feet in between each stage. We think there's opportunity to further optimize that to tighter stage spacing. We're going to see how these wells, kind of come back this year. So,
Right.
But I think that's a further optimization that we'll look toward. And I think one of the great things that we have going on at the moment with these 2 wells is that these are the first wells being fracked by Liberty equipment. So we have 32 pumps out there, over 80,000 horsepower, H&P brought out, which is kind of standard here in the U.S. But bigger hammer, in your words. We're going to look to do bigger fracs beyond 2,800 pounds per foot. Up to 4,000 pounds per foot is in the horizon in the next 12 months. So bigger fracs, longer laterals. It's a multi-stage. You have different layers. So some of the cool things that Exxon are doing around cube development design. So basically being able to develop, two or more sections at a time. That because this is a multi-stacked shell, we have the opportunity to do that same kind of thing in the Beetaloo. That to me is more of a later this decade kind of thing.
Right.
We have a couple, we want to be really focused on the primary shell, but kind of as we think about 12 months from now, bigger fracs, longer laterals, and then in the horizon is how do we develop, multi layers of the Beetaloo.
Yeah, it got crazy on some of the stuff we were looking at Kane. I forget the details around this one play, but we literally figured out that as much as 10 feet in terms of where we landed the lateral really, really mattered. Like 35% difference in the well. And none of the engineers could ever give me a straight answer on why is that. I mean, aren't we blasting away a frac bigger than that?
You just have the frac wing kind of.
Yeah, and it also, we never got to the point where we drilled 500 wells because we were always flipping before then. So it may have been you drilled 20 wells and it just so happened, that the 5 really good wells were in this zone. But yeah, it kind of gets crazy. The coolest thing about all this, and I know I'm stating the obvious, is 2 million acres. You get to play with all of it.
2 million acres, and it's very thick. So you're not talking about 10 feet. You're trying to stand, and geosteer and try to find a sweet spot. You have around a 500-foot section. You're picking the best 70 feet within that 500 feet.
Yeah.
And so, just because of the scale, you don't have this small margin of error, that you have in some of the basins here. It's like such enormous opportunity, or such enormous scale, both from a acreage perspective, but also from how thick the shell is. And so it's a real positive.
So 2 wells are down and drilled now?
So we have 2 wells that are down, drilled and cased, and we have a Liberty frac crew that is mobilizing and should be pumping the first fracs here in the next week.
Oh, cool.
So we'll do zipper fracs. So we'll do the frac job over both wells back to back, and then we'll start flowing back probably in February.
Okay. How far apart are the well bores?
So they're about, I would say, about 20 feet.
Oh,
so it's quite close.
Yeah.
They're They're about, I think about 700 feet separated at the reservoir level.
Okay.
So they have some delineation in the well.
Oh wow. Okay. So you'll potentially see each frac and
Correct.
the other. Interesting. No, that's cool.
So we'll get into the other thing. I think from an optimization perspective, coming back to your original question, is that we're going to likely in the next series of wells this year, we'll have some microseismic that we're going to run.
Yeah.
So that'll be able to really give us more data about the effectiveness of the fracs. So
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I'm so jealous because this is. I was telling Brian that when we were eating crab in the middle of Singapore, I'm so jealous. You get to actually do a lease and drill with 2 million acres, so that you can afford to be thoughtful. You know, a lot of times if you had your 10,000 acre postage stamp in the United States, you screw up one thing, you're gone. You've messed it up. Yeah. So that's cool. So we'll know about that. Call it maybe March,
early April. We'll get a 30-day flow test that we'll report to market.
Oh, okay.
So we're excited about that. That's a near-term catalyst for the company. And then, our target is to bring on first production in first half of 26.
Okay.
So depending on the performance of the first 2 wells, we'll guide how many wells we need to drill to feed into a binding gas sales agreement we have with the NT government.
Okay.
It's $40 million a day for 15 years. So right now we're carrying 4 additional wells this year that we'll drill after these 2 wells. We could get to a situation if we have better performance that we'll need less wells to fill that gas sales agreement.
Okay.
So that'll start in first half of 26. And then, the performance of those up to 6 wells will guide our planning on the additional drilling that we need to develop a much bigger development.
So you basically vent for 30 days to get your 30-day test, and then depending on that, you'll figure out how to tie in.
Correct.
How hard is it going to be to tie in?
So we have a deal that we've signed with APA, who's the Kinder Morgan of Australia.
Right.
APA, we've signed a binding deal to have a tie-in pipeline to the main line that goes to Darwin, where we're selling the gas at the local gas plant. That powers about 95% of all the electricity in the Northern Territory. So where you flew into in Darwin, it's a pretty small community. It's only about 260,000 people. And so they feed all their electricity from the gas-fired power that we're feeding into. So, that'll be key for the government. It'll be key for the Northern Territory. We think that's key to building social license in the territory by literally our gas keeping the lights on in the territory. So that's by design.
Any worries about having the wells shut in for 6 months in terms of potential performance?
We think what we've seen is when we shut in wells in the Beetaloo and bring them back on after a long period of time, you actually see better performance. And this relates to the 1.2 billion year old rock because it's highly desiccated, desiccated is a word for being very dry. So it's like a sponge. Yeah. So when you pump your frac, what you see is your fracture, it basically just drinks all your water. You only get about 15% of the water back. Whereas in the US, you might get 60, 70% of the water back. In the Beetaloo, because it's so highly desiccated, you only get about 10, 15% of the water back. So what happens is when you shut in, that water continually migrates through the shell and has these micro fractures that continue. And when you bring it back on, those new fracture pathways for the gas to flow kind of result in around 30, 40% better performance after you shut it in.
Yeah.
And we realize this, and this is something that's studied by PhDs. There's some desiccated shells in the Marcellus, and so there's a lot of literature on this. But because U.S. gas guys have been so focused on getting production on as quickly as possible. They've never tested the thesis.
Well, it was religion that you got to get the
Yeah.
water off the shale. And with Grenadier, we had a 40,000 acre position kind of in West Virginia, and we fracked a well, and we had a mudslide.
Right.
So we had to shut in, and we weren't able to get back to that well for 120 days. And we were worried. We turned it on, and we'd already internally kind of written it off. You know, this is going to be bad. The water's been sitting there. First things first, we got no water production. To your point, maybe 10% of it coming back. And then the second thing that happened, 2x the IP rate. And it wound up being 2x the EURs. And so the president at the next boarding meeting is like, I know this is crazy. We're going to do this again.
Shut in.
And that's what we did. We would frack, and I think the most we waited was 6 months.
Sure.
But yeah, it was almost linear. You know, if you
the more you shut in,
60 days, 90 days. Yeah.
So we found this out similar kind of way is when we drilled 2 horizontals with Santos in 2021, and they had trouble getting a workover rig to run the tubing. And so we had a situation where we flowed back out of casing at the 4.5-inch casing, got an IP. It was kind of so, but we shut in waiting on the workover rig to bring so that we could run tubing. That ended up taking 4 months. So we ran the tubing, brought it back on, and it was, 30-40% better. And our guys really took note of that. And then when we formed the partnership with Brian, we started sharing some of this information about, hey, you need to shut these wells in to let them soak a little bit before you bring them on and cut on your IP30. So these 2 wells that we have, getting ready to do a test, we have a short soaking period, but the real exciting bit is after we shut in after 30 days, we'll have about, up to 9 months that we're going to wait to get bring the pipeline to bring the gas on production. And so we're going to get a chance to see how the production so it compares from the 30-day IP to 9 months later after 9 months of being shut in.
Right.
And if that's a linear relationship, that's going to be super exciting to see kind of the performance uptick in that period. So we'll see.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So a couple other things I wanted to ask about. Any worry about the politics in Australia? I think
I always worry about it.
Okay, fair,
I worry about it every day.
Fair enough. No, because I mean, I think except for a 2-week period in Great Britain, the Northern Territory is the only place that's had a fracking ban that's then lifted the fracking ban.
That's right. I mean, look, I've been in this job 12 years, so I've seen a lot of ebbs and flows of politics in Australia, both at the federal level and the state level. And you mentioned the moratorium, that got put in the territory right after the Amungi 1 well was one of the first horizontal wells in the Beetaloo was fracked and brought on a 30-day IP. They put that fracking moratorium on literally within about a month of getting that result.
We put out a video of Alex talking about they knew they had to get this frac, so they had any sort of data to kind of fight this fight the fight. Yeah.
Alex deserves a lot of credit. The Origin team. There's a gentleman named David Close who was previously with Origin, previously with Tamboran. He's now in University of Queensland. But there was some guys in that little short period of time that deserve a lot of credit because they got that data point that I think allowed there to be light at the end of the tunnel when it came to the moratorium and some of the reviews that took place, of which there were a lot of it's primarily a regulatory exercise around how do we install new regulations to protect, some of the concerns that the community were having, primarily on water. But the other aspect was, is this basin commercial at all?
Right.
Is this
that was the proof, at least in my mind. That was when I found out about that well, and we were literally standing out at the well,
right,
talking about it, and it was $1 million a day for 90 straight days,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
That even though that's not economic, I at least go, okay, Brian, in my mind, that's the proof of deliverability that if we do things right, you know,
100%.
I can see why you'd want to drill more wells here.
100%. And, you know, that was a great data point leading into that fracking moratorium, which was it was very difficult for the industry. You know, think about where we were in 2017,
Right.
where, you know, Origin and Santos were both the major operators out there, but, you know, they had different priorities. There was this overhang of uncertainty around the regulations and whether they were actually going to come out of a moratorium or not. And then, you know, fast forward, they came out of the moratorium in 2019. Santos drilled 2 horizontal wells quickly thereafter, but then we went right into COVID.
Right.
So, you know, and then there was a change of government on the federal side to a left-leaning government that put in a lot of new regulations at the federal level. So, you know, one of the people asked me a lot, you know, kind of why hasn't the Beetaloo been developed yet? You know, why has it taken over a decade to get to this point? And I think the short answer to that is because, you know, other than the Samungi 1 flow test, there hasn't been enough window of time to actually get active and to generate the information that you need for people to get excited about the commercialization of the basin, because it's been the headwinds that we've had with the regulations changing at the state level, regulations changing at the federal level. And, you know, the other aspect is that when you look at all the early stage basins, it was independents that came in and were aggressive and,
right,
you know, really got the initial data points. And then the bigger companies came after that. And I think that's what's going to be happening here in the Beetaloo, where the aggressive independents are coming in, doing a lot of early work now that the regulations have been set. And that's not an overhang anymore. That gives the pathway for a bigger company to get comfortable around putting billions of dollars to work and creating a bigger development. So
the other thing that I think was happening in the United States is you had, to your point, the independents created the shale revolution.
Yep.
Then the big guys go, oh, we can toggle on capital, you know, fairly quickly. Exxon decides to buy XTO, later, you know, Pioneer, et cetera. Yep. You had them go inward facing. And so running around looking in the Northern Territory in Australia just wasn't on anybody's list.
No, the timing was not right.
Yeah.
For the Beetaloo to attract a bigger company. And we were very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time when Origin was wanting to get out, right in the peak of ESG. And, you know, they were getting they were having a lot of issues with respect to activists coming on their share register and causing a lot of problems at their general meetings. And they didn't want these headaches. And so, to your point, it was too early for a big company to get interested because they didn't have the long horizontal flow test, and they just had to Mungie 1 well.
Right.
And so it sort of created this perfect storm for us to kind of approach Origin. I flew to Austin, met with Brian and said, Brian, like, you know, he had already become a shareholder of Tamboran, but like for us, I pitched him this big vision. And, cause I knew I needed someone like Brian that had that entrepreneurial spirit, that, you know, had a presence here in the US, had connectivity with a lot of the funds that he made a lot of money for at Parsley. And again, it was right place, right time for him as well. Yeah. You know, coming out of Parsley in 21 and then 22 is when I flew to Austin to pitch him this big plan. So
now I don't detect an accent. So you're not Australian by birth, are you?
No. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
My dad was in the Navy, so he was Pensacola, Florida was where I grew up, and went to University of Florida. So, and I was recruited by Exxon out of Florida, where I spent about 10 years in Houston. So
what was the discipline?
Mechanical engineering.
So you're a mechanical engineer and you came.
So people have tried to put an accent to me. It's funny because when I when I go back home, my Alabama
It
Southern
comes out.
twang comes out. And then when I'm in Houston, you know, a lot more Texan twang, I guess. And then I spent a lot of time in New York marketing.
Yeah.
So
Well, that was gonna be my final question. What's it like being a public company and doing the IPO?
yeah,
All that stuff.
oh, man, it was a heavy lift. We were the first company to complete a IPO in the U.S. as a non-revenue E&P company in 13 years. So
I would have said longer than that, but yeah.
2009.
Wow.
So, and that was my previous company I worked for, Cobalt.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I remember
a
Cobalt.
$1 billion IPO we did there. So it's been a long time. And, you know, we had the kind of the broad strategy was we recognized in order to be well capitalized coming into a development phase of the Beetaloo, we needed to be connected to the U.S. markets, primarily to have access to debt and equity and, you know, investors that have made a lot of money in U.S. shale. They understand LNG, which would be a big part of our business plan. And, you know, have deep pools that we could access. And, you know, we're very fortunate to get away the IPO. It was, you know, we met with over 200 investors.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest.
I didn't think you were going to be able to get it done. I wasn't trying to be, you know,
I think a lot of people
Nancy, but I was like, Brian, what are you doing?
Yeah. A lot of people felt that way.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I give a lot of credit to Brian on, you know, opening a lot of doors from, you know, people that he's close to in the capital markets here in the U.S. Blake London,
Yep.
you know, on his team, you know, they put their shoulder into this. And, you know, we have a lot of guys on our team as well tied to the capital markets. And so, you know, my approach is you got to have 1,000 conversations, man. You got to just,
No, that's right.
You got to hit the road, and you got to talk to everyone. And I feel really positive about getting the IPO away, but what I feel the most positive on is the fact that we've educated, you know, a lot of investors that are waiting on these 2 well tests.
Right.
And they just couldn't get there on the IPO because it was a little bit too early.
Yeah.
But once we get, you know, through a couple of these milestones, I think there's going to be a lot of momentum that gets built from a lot of people I've already spent a lot of time with that understand what I'm trying to accomplish and that are sold on the Beetaloo, subject to,
right,
you know, a couple of milestones getting accomplished. So.
You'll appreciate this. And so I think he's a great guy. I actually interviewed him for a job when he was coming out of school. So Randy Bayless has been a friend for a long time.
Nice.
I said when we were down in Australia at the pub, at Tim's pub.
Oh yeah.
I actually said, "You're seriously charging Brian for buying shares on the IPO?"
Yeah, exactly. Randy Bayless, baby.
Randy sent a long, very formal email back, and I go, "I'm sitting here with Sheffy. I'm just messing with you. Just messing with you." But
yeah, Randy is a beast. And again, you know, I give a few people credit for the IPO. I think it's, you know, Randy is high up there. You know, he's one of the best bankers in the industry.
Yeah.
And, you know, he brought this Bank of America, you know, as a firm, one of the leading capital providers to their industry. And, you know, those guys are top quality blue chip.
Yeah.
And I think without them, you know, we had some, you know, great lawyers on the, that shaped the S1 and, you know, Latham Watkins and those guys are top notch as well. So I think my vision was, you know, we got to do, you know, everything in a blue chip way.
Right.
You know, we got a blue chip, largest shareholder in Brian. You know, we have a group of guys on the transaction that signal to the market this is a real, you know, blue chip type IPO. And then the other thing that helped was just having partnerships with H&P and Liberty, who the U.S. market has a lot of respect for. And I think, you know, a lot of investors said, look, if investment thesis is good enough for H&P and Liberty. Obviously, they're biased with it having services tied to it, but Chris Wright is obviously someone well respected in our industry and the U.S. capital market as well. And so,
Right.
That validation, I think, helped, sell our story quite a bit.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to watch and see what. So, have you publicly said what you think, quote unquote, success is for these 2 wells, or expectation is for these wells?
Yeah, essentially, what we've guided the market toward is replicating the productivity that we saw in our 500-meter horizontal.
Okay.
That we saw, 3.2 million a day over 500 meters. So if you think about a 10,000-foot lateral and assume the same productivity, that would be up to 18 million a day. That would be up there in the top quartile of Marcellus type performance.
And
18 million a day over 30 days.
So you've got a 10,000-foot horizontal.
Correct.
And so like the actual flow rate, let's say it averages 18 million a day.
Yeah.
For 30 days. Okay.
So that's kind of what we put out there. Now, a couple of things to note. One is that 18 million a day equivalent flow rate that we saw in the first well, that was done with a Australian frac equipment.
Right.
So that was about 35,000 horsepower.
Yeah.
We're dealing with 80,000 horsepower on the Liberty equipment. We pumped up to 2,250 pounds per foot. We're pumping up to 2,800 pounds per foot.
Right.
So bigger, hitting it with a bigger hammer. And we're pumping more stages per 10,000 foot. So, we only pump 10 stages over 500 meters. So that would be equivalent to 60 stages over 10,000 feet. So we're pumping 14 more stages.
So I wind up on Twitter and in text and DMs getting this, walk me through the IPs of all these Australian wells and stuff. And I feel like the Nate Bargatze playing George Washington thing. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Because I can't do the
conversion.
The conversions in my head or even come close to it.
We had this issue in the IPO. We had to convert everything to feet. That's what the US investors want to see it. So I go between meters and feet because I sit on both. I'm talking to Australian people as well as US people. So
yeah, and you're a mechanical engineer, so you can do it. I was a finance guy that was like, if you give me more than 7 numbers, they get lost. Give me my sentence. I need to know.
Yeah. So 18 million a day for 10,000 feet is what we're trying to replicate.
Right.
Nothing more, nothing less.
Have you taken it a step further of saying 18 million a day for the 10,000 feet gives me an XYZ UR?
Yeah.
IRRs.
Yeah. So if you model this like a Marcellus, type curve, that would be equivalent kind of 1-to-1. So 18 million a day would be equivalent to about 18 BCF.
Okay.
Recovery per well. So, we're not going to know the ultimate EUR or get comfortable with the ultimate EUR until we get 12 months out on the production.
Oh, as I used to say, that's the ultimate time to use the Bargatze line. Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
I mean, we would be sitting there watching wells, and I mean the difference between a 1.2 and a 1.3 B factor. Right. I mean,
huge.
That's sometimes 5 years and 25 wells to tell the difference on. So,
totally. I mean, and that's the purpose of the pilot.
Right.
Is the pilot's great because it gets first production on, we get first revenues into the company. It helps energy security in the territory, builds social license, does all that. But as an engineer, the biggest thing we're going to be able to do is demonstrate without a doubt what a type curve looks like in the Beetaloo. And right now we're saying it's a Marcellus type curve, but honestly, the rocks look very similar to the Marcellus. The initial 90-day flow test we had in the last well lines up with the Marcellus type curve, but there's a good chance that these type curves in the Beetaloo, could be, better than the Marcellus. So we're not going to know that until we have a 12 months of flow.
So were you more ops engineering or reservoir during your 10 years?
It's
at
more
Exxon?
reservoir. It's
More reservoir. Okay,
yeah.
good.
So I had some.
If you were ops, I was going to have to give you the speech. Don't change every freaking variable to each well.
Yeah.
All the ops engineers, they
Yeah.
just want to optimize everything. And it's like, no, you change one variable so you can measure it. Yeah. Reservoir guys get that.
So yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like keeping the design very tight for these 6 wells.
Yeah.
And the concept is to prove EUR per well, but also show learning curve from well 1 to well 6. So if you do like variations in your well design and you're changing stuff on your completion design, like I want to just see a cost learning curve that, goes from, linear, you can get down to sub 15 million US type per well. And, we're doing a lot of things to optimize, but to your point, if you do a lot of changes, you're not going to be able to accomplish that.
Yeah, particularly if you get an unexpected result.
Yeah.
So we were sitting in a board meeting one time and great CEO, love the guy, but he was the operations engineer that literally had 15 ideas to optimize on everything. And we're going through there, and I looked at him, and we'll just call him George, change the names to protect the innocent. I go, George, you do know there have been more 3-run or more innings in Major League Baseball without a home run than with a home run. And George looks at me and goes, no, is that true? What? I go, yeah. I go, singles and doubles actually matter. So it's just all this. And, he was like, okay, I get that. And it changed the whole meeting and all. Later that night at the board dinner when I was drunk, I made that shit up.
Well, I have this speech I've given my team, and Brian's heard it as well, like around the JV table. And when we think about the next 6 wells, I said, guys, we're on the first tee and we're just trying to put a 5-iron in the middle of the fairway.
Exactly.
That's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to pull it back like John Daly and cut off a dog leg and be a hero. Like, this is no time to be a hero.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 12 years into this job.
Right.
I've been building toward this moment.
Right.
There's so much, sweat equity that's gone into this, but not just myself, but, people like Philip Quigley with Falcon.
Right.
He's been at it, I think 13 years, 1 year more than me. There's others. I mean, Brian has over $150 million of his own money into this.
Right.
We just got
Alex Underwood's very interested in watching what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. So we're like, there's a lot riding. And so we don't, this is, we get 5 years down the road, we can optimize, we can maybe pull it back a little bit and put a 3-wood, start getting out the 3-wood or the driver. But right now we just put a 5-iron, lace it right in the middle of the fairway and get this play moving.
No, I like the fact that you're drilling I like the fact that you're drilling the 6 wells in the same area.
Right.
Because a lot of people would be, I got 2 million acres, one here, one here, one here. It's like, no, let's find something we can make a 25% rate of return on and repeat that for a while.
Yep.
And
and I've sat around the table with the biggest companies in the world. One of my ex company I started out with. And the design of the program, the 6-well pilot, followed by, some 3D seismic around that pilot area, plus there's a few other delineation wells we want to drill and get to a multi-BCF a day type development. That plan that we've now executing, that is what bigger companies want to see as well.
Yeah.
So I've asked Exxon directly, like, how would you, if you had a clean sheet of paper, 5 million gross acres,
right,
what would you do? And after a lot of conversation, it was basically what we're doing.
Yeah.
That they 2 things. You need to show EUR and show that consistently over multiple wells. So type curve, 12-month type curve. And you need to show kind of a cost learning curve. And you need to have real U.S. equipment out in the basin so that, the H&P, Liberty, you need to have a sand solution. So we'll have a sand solution in place next year. And, if you show me that data and, that'll be a pathway for a bigger company to come in.
And quite frankly, that's what they do well.
Right.
I mean, you're a great guy, and
Yeah.
Brian's a great guy, and if y'all wanted to, y'all could grow into that, but it's going to be their bailiwick at some point.
At some point, yeah. And that's again the role of the independent.
Totally.
So you think about it, you come in, you get your hands dirty, you elbow around, and you've seen it over time, many, many times here in the US where the independent comes in and, kind of does the hard work and
Totally.
gets his hands dirty. And, the bigger company comes in and goes, look, we have a project management skills and, 1,000 engineers and, we can come in and add value at some point in the cycle. And I think the same will happen in the Beetaloo at some point.
So real quick, just give me the Finance Bros stats. How many shares outstanding? What's the stock price?
Yeah. So we IPO'd at $24 a share.
Okay.
We've traded down, I think primarily due to the lack of liquidity, kind of right after the IPO.
Yeah, they sold every share they could
because
you needed the money.
Yeah. The performance coming out of the IPO has not been what we have liked, but as we've moved closer to this like milestone around the 2 wells being drilled and flow tests coming up, I think we're starting to see a lot more liquidity pick up, and we're trending kind of back to that IPO price. I think, we're trading in the low 20s at the moment. But I think there's a bit of runway there as we lead up into the 30-day IPs later this quarter.
Yeah.
So, shares outstanding is 17.5 million shares.
Okay.
So that was post the conversion of the IPO.
So 400-ish million.
For $400 million market cap.
Gotcha.
I think, if we have success in these 2 wells, we get on production, kind of first half of 26, we can start trading at an earnings multiple that,
right.
If you get into that mindset, we're very cheap.
Yeah.
When you think about,
no, I mean, if you start talking $1 per acre, that's nothing.
No,
so
exactly. And I think that's the near-term catalyst. I think the other thing is that I think these 2 wells are going to stimulate a lot of interest for farming out some pieces of the acreage.
Right.
So, that could result in carried wells, getting some cash back.
Right.
Having
more data points. Pushing you closer into that EURs. Exactly.
Correct. So there's a couple of companies that we've been in the data room talking through, and we think there's an opportunity later this year to bring in another bigger company,
right, to
help us carry us through the first wave of development. And then that plus the first production in first half of 26, I think there's a lot of upside, beyond these 2 wells. So
where do people find out? Y'all got a website?
Yeah, so we have a website, TBN, Tamboran.com. TBN is our ticker. We're a public company, so you got a big 500-page S1 out there. Perfect. On our website if you want to do a deep dive on the company's business plan. We've been very deliberate in a lot of the presentations and materials we put out there in the public domain to be very clear with what we're working toward, what our milestones are, and how we can create a lot of value for our shareholders. And so that's something we're clearly very focused on at the moment.
Well, Joel, you were cool to come on and in effect do the repeat. Just so the listeners know, right when Brian said, "Yeah, you can come to Australia with me," Joel and Dick Stoneburner just happened to be in town, and they said, "Well, hey, we'll come by." We recorded a podcast, and I sucked. It was really bad. Every once in a while, I re-record one of these because the guest is no good. I mean, Joel and Dick were great, and I was like, "What is that?" I think I was talking about Playboy magazine in the middle of it. Yeah. But Dick was kind enough to come back last week.
Yeah, great.
So so we'll release Dick where we talk more about his career and everything he did, and we'll get this release. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks.
Welcome to Houston.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
Good to be with you. Thank you.